Hey guys, welcome back to First and 10 over here on Clueless Gamers. I'm your host Pete, joined in a second by my co-host Brian. Brian, it's been a little bit, so we apologize to the audience as well. It's been really my fault. I got sick and then just have kind of had some work things going on, so it's and we just haven't figured out our times. But we're back. We missed a couple weeks here. We're back here going into week 7. We're going to be covering week 6. We'll talk about the other couple weeks 4 and 5 we missed kind of as we go on in the show, but we won't overly focus on them. But if you want to talk down below in the comments, feel free. We would love to talk about individual games, teams, whatever is going on. But Bri, with all that being said, welcome back. It's good to see you. We're back here on First and 10 discovering what team might be dominant. I don't think we figured out through 6 weeks plus a Thursday night game who's the top dog, who's the MVP front runners. I feel like there's a lot of things in the air. We were talking before we went here live, just the spreads have been weird this season in terms of point differentials. Some of the storylines, like the teams are on roller coasters that we've never seen before. I mean, it's just been a wild but fun time as always in the NFL. What are you thinking so far, man? And how you been?
Yeah, I mean, the NFL, it's always a wild ride. But first and foremost, it's great to be back and very glad that you are feeling better and
Thank
we
you, thank
can
you.
be on again to talk football, which is what we love to do. So, I mean, I remember the last time we did a show, we were doing our picks. One of the games was Miami, Denver. Well, if you remember that a few weeks back,
Yeah,
70 points scored by the Miami Dolphins,
yeah,
and a
that
lot of
was
talk about how they've been revolutionizing offense with just what they've been doing. It's been incredible. But you look at a couple other things. I mean, the Jets have gone from completely out of it, like no chance after that Patriot game, which was just a debacle, to competitive against the Chiefs, where they probably should have won, to a win at Denver, and then their most impressive win by far last week in taking down the previously unbeaten Eagles. So, a lot to get to today. I'm looking forward to it, and as always, a lot going on.
that was a great preamble. I'm ready to get into it. And Brian, let's jump back to week 6. Let's get right into it. A lot of games, of course, as always, that you could focus on, but usually we pick a couple. Just want to, kind of talk about them. We talk about the other teams as we go on. We try not to leave anyone out. But I'm going to start in Cleveland because this was a huge game. Cleveland, San Francisco. Cleveland wins 19-17 due to rookie kicker Jake Moody right at the end. He has like a 40-something yard field goal. I think it was like 41, maybe it was. Maybe it was 47, misses the kick wide right, and the Browns go on to win the game. It was a disgusting rainy day there in Cleveland. PJ Walker was starting for the Browns. He's the third starting quarterback of the year with the whole, we could talk about the whole weird Deshaun Watson situation that's going on with his shoulder AC joint. Is he going to play this week? Who knows? But the Niners, a previously unbeaten team, one of the only two remaining unbeaten teams going into week 6, as you said, the aforementioned Eagles, and they, in the Niners, also lost in the earlier window. This was a game that I expected to be bruising. I expected to be a little bloody, a little bit close. We're talking about a Browns defense that deserves all of the credit in the world. We're talking about a team that we have not seen a defense play like this in about 40 years since the Vikings, the Purple People Eaters back in the 70s. That's how good this defense has been. They are number one in every major statistical category in the entire defensive categories in terms of passing yards per game, rushing yards per game, total yards, points, everything you can think of. Sacks, they are up there at the top of everything. This has been a defense that through the first only 6 weeks, but still is reminds me of these old, in a different way, but reminds me of the domination of the Legion of Boom or those early Steeler and kind of early 2000s Raven defenses. They have the potential to be that good if they could keep that going through the season. And the Niners kind of ran into a defensive buzzsaw there, and it ends up helping Cleveland get a much needed win in a crowded AFC North. Brian, how'd you see this game breaking down, and what was your impressions of this game going down?
Yeah, going in, I mean, I felt very confidently in saying that the 49ers were the best team in the league, and not only the best team in the
A
league,
lot
the
of people
best
said.
team by a wide margin.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was thinking some of the games that I've watched this team play this year, is this like the best team of the last 5 years potentially?
They've
Like,
been
that's
dominant.
just how much talent they have both sides of the ball, and everything just seemed to be clicking. look at the destruction of the Cowboys on that Sunday night
Yeah,
game,
we
a
missed that too.
Cowboys team that's right. The Cowboys, are no slouch. I mean, they have their own issues as they often do, but for the 49ers to just take them apart like they did, just really flex their muscle. So that is just shows how impressive of a win
For
this
sure.
was for the Browns to do it with a backup quarterback. By the way, not having Nick Chubb, their
Of
all
course.
world running back. So and the 49ers started off fast in this game. They scored the first touchdown. I kind of thought would just be on their way. But you do have to look at the fact that there were some obviously key injuries for the
Yes.
Niners in this game, and we wondered could could it lead to an absence for Christian McCaffrey or Debo Samuel, but it seems like both players are considered day to day or
They're
week to week,
trending.
might not even
Yeah.
miss a single game. But McCaffrey, that was awfully a scare with that oblique when you saw him
For
go into the
sure.
locker room. I mean, he's been what top three MVP. You certainly can make
For
him the
sure.
case that
Yeah,
he's the leading
absolutely.
candidate right now,
Yeah.
the way he's played. So that obviously played a big role. But you mentioned it. I mean, the Browns defense to hold them down the way they did. Brock Purdy, not a strong game at all, and he had been playing great.
Yeah.
Speaking of MVP caliber, he had been right up there. But this was kind of a humbling moment for him. I don't really have concern about the 49ers, especially since they seem to dodge a bullet with these injuries. I'll just chalk it up to kind of an anomaly, one loss here, but certainly give the Browns a lot of credit. I mean, that was not a result that I saw coming.
Yeah, Brian, I want to circle back to just that point because in the few weeks that we have missed here in the 2 or 3 weeks, there's been a lot of discussion. We talked about before we went live here of like this. There's not really, it's early, but of course we talk about these things. There's not really an MVP front runner out there, right? And a lot of popular picks, especially in the media, has been well. Do we give Brock Purdy some looks there because of the way he's been playing? And I kind of wanted to pick your brain and get your thoughts on that because, in my mind, my personal opinion, to me, he's not an MVP candidate. I mean, at least up to this point, even before this game, I don't care how well he was playing. He throws 4 touchdowns against the Cowboys, all that stuff. He's surrounded by an A+ all-star cast that are on offense, Pro Bowlers and Hall of Fame level players everywhere. And I understand you still have to be the guy that has to execute. You have to make the right plays. I get all that. But with Kyle Shanahan as your play caller, you got Debo, Ayuk, McCaffrey, Williams at left tackle there. You got a really solid offensive line. Kittle at tight end. Like, it feels like the most ideal, easy situation you can get on an offense. And I think in this game, and I understand it's one game going against a great defense that I just lavished about, at the top of this discussion in the Cleveland Browns. But I think there's a little bit of concern here in terms of the Brock Purdy element because this is the first time that he's lost in the regular season. This is the first time that he was really trailing in a fourth quarter and really trailing and having a close game throughout the entire game because this team is to their credit, they're big front runners. They get out to a quick lead and they bludgeon teams, and those teams cannot come back. And that pass rush on defense could just get off on the opposing quarterback. And I look at it now and I'm like, if we have a tight game in the playoffs where you're going to play other good teams like the Philadelphia Eagles, maybe we could talk about like the Detroit Lions. Do I trust Brock Purdy to be that guy that's going to lead them in a tight game to the Super Bowl? At this point, I don't, Bry. I mean, I kind of want to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, I feel like we have seen enough good play out of him that I'm inclined to say I trust him reasonably. I mean, I'm not putting him in the elite quarterback
Mm-hmm.
conversation by any means. I'm not putting him in the MVP. To me, right now, the MVP frontrunner should be Tua. I don't know if you agree with that, but he's my pick right
Yeah, I
now.
think it's a
I've
good
seen a
choice.
lot of Mahomes. To me, this has not been a vintage
No,
Mahomes
no,
MVP
not at
kind
all.
of year. So I wouldn't go there. I would go with Tua right now. But I do think I've been impressed with Purdy, and we know it's a great system with Kyle Shanahan and the weapons he has at his disposal. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that this was one game against the team that is ranked as the best defense right now, and I think we've seen enough good football out of him that he'll be able to rise to the moment. Of course, the proof will be in the pudding when they get there. I mean, we know this team's going to be playoff bound, and they're going to be going up against good teams come the playoffs, and we'll see if he's able to rise to it.
Yeah, it's just that you have less than 100 yards up until the final drive of the game, and now credit to where credit is due. He did make the plays enough to drive the team down the field. He had a few throws to Jennings, I believe it was, and he got them down the field to get in field goal range. And then it's a tough rainy day, and Moody, rookie kicker, he had a tough day. I just think there's a little bit of pause there where this is something that I've had in my mind for a while, and it's like I just don't know if everything isn't perfectly right. If this team that has historically been very injury prone, they're very much like the Ravens here in the NFC. The Niners are a very injury prone team over the years, historically. I don't know if he's down a couple of those offensive pieces. Can he really be the team to keep them afloat, be the guy that keeps the team afloat and keep them alive? I just haven't seen that at this point, but it remains to be seen. Good win for the Browns in a tight AFC North. I'm not worried about the Niners overall as a team, considering that, as you said, a lot of these guys appear to be day-to-day with their injuries. It just, when we go up against these better teams, I think it's something to pay attention to in the whole Brock Purdy element. Brian, do you have a game that you wanted to jump into from week 6?
Yeah, well, I think we got to spend some time on the local football
I knew
teams,
you were
of which
going
there
there.
is a lot to discuss. Some good, some bad, and some in between,
In
I
between.
guess. But
Yeah.
for the Jets, right now, we got to give
Talk
them
up your
a
team.
moment here. Of course, they go into the bye week, so we won't have a pick for them this week. But that game last week, as good of a win as the franchise has had in a long
It was big.
time. I don't think there's any question about it. I thought this was a game that they could be close in. I thought they'd be competitive. I don't think I would have said I had the guts to pick them to win outright,
No,
and
neither of us did.
that's just what they did. And to me, this game came down to the defense keeping them in all game long. Like the Eagles' offense was kind of held at bay. It was not a good game for Jalen Hurts. The turnovers were particularly problematic for him. I mean, the Jets' offense really didn't do a whole lot in this game, but the defense is what the calling card of this team is all along. That's what they're going to have to rely on in order to be successful. And that's kind of what we talked about, like offensively with Zach Wilson. The main goal for him is not to screw it up,
Yeah,
right? And
exactly.
so far, the last couple of games, he hasn't. And that was the problem last year. Like they got off to the good start. All he had to do was not screw it up, and he did. It was interceptions and turnovers galore. Now he's at least taking care of the football, and that's really the biggest thing you can say about him. And, the defense took over last week, obviously got the huge play late. It seemed like the game was teetering all along there, 14-12. Then you get the huge interception from Tony Adams. It takes it down near the 10-yard line. The Eagles, I guess, let Brees Hall score on that touchdown. Didn't seem like a great decision for them because then they end up turning the ball over again. Not that they really were going to do anything at that point, but it amounts to just a great win for the Jets, one certainly that they seem like they should be able to build on, especially when you consider after the bye they have the Giants, a game that they definitely should win.
Yep.
And at that point, you have a winning record and you go from there. But really, this season for the Jets, it kind of feels like a movie, doesn't it? I
It
mean, the
does.
way it
Yeah.
started with week 1, with Rodgers going down. Now, of course, we still hear from him every week on the Pat McAfee show and
Yep.
talk that he's going to make a return late
It's
season,
not.
maybe,
It's
of
not happening.
playoffs.
Let's pump the brakes. It's not happening.
I I certainly don't think it's likely, but the way he's talking, it seems like
He
he's
looks good.
awfully committed to the rehab and just have to see how it plays out. But it's been a wild ride, and certainly this game to get that win against not only a team that was undefeated, but a team that they had never beaten before in
Ever.
their franchise history,
Yeah.
ever.
0 and
Never
12.
beaten the Eagles. They got it done. It was a remarkable win.
Yeah, that was a stat that I didn't realize that when the game started. I went, wait, excuse me? They haven't beaten the Eagles in the history of the franchise. They're 0 and 12. What a huge
Right.
win. I'll agree with you. Props to you. I'm happy for you, man. Happy for all Jets fans out there. You guys deserve that one. I think it's clear to say there's limitations here, of course, for this team because the offense, it's not particularly fantastic. Like, you can't beat some of these better teams by just Zach not screwing it up, right? Like, you do need a little more juice there. The hope there is, hey, maybe we can progress from very bad Zach to, not turn the ball over, kind of very game manager Zach to, hey, can you give me a little bit? I'm not saying to go out there and be one of these superstar quarterbacks, live up to the number 2 overall pick, but can you give me a little more juice? And maybe that's a possibility that we'll see here if they lean on that run game. I mean, I don't think it could be understated what Garrett Wilson has done for this offense. And just it was a little bit of scare here because he kind of got hurt there on the turf here in this game, which if this is another PSA to change MetLife's turf, please change that turf. But he's been really just an outstanding piece. He's been even better than I thought he would be here in his second year and what he's done, the attention he brings. And I also think it's worth mentioning, obviously, your defense played so well, gets 4 turnovers. You're without your top 2 corners in this game.
Yeah,
so I don't think that can be understated as well. They played out of their mind. Yes, with the Eagles, they got away from the running game in a weird way, which made no sense. And Hurts played one of his poorest games he's had in his career. But this defense did great. And I'm always someone that, I know there was a little bit of disagreement there that you kind of brought up at the end of the game. They let Breece Hall in. Do you go down and you kick the field goal and you run out? A million things could happen there, especially when you're the Jets. And it's just the truth. You could have the field goal blocked. It could be a bad snap. I say if they're giving you the free points, take them, especially when they have to drive the entire field against a defense that already had 3 turnovers at that point. And hey, if you drive the whole field and beat us by 1, hey, we lost. You beat us, that's it. But I'd rather rely on the strength of my defense to win that game. And they came through there. I think it was incredibly impressive. I'm not super concerned on the other side of it about the Eagles. I do think that the Eagles have been flirting the last few weeks with a little bit of disaster. I think they're struggling with kind of their identity. We talked about this in kind of our first show of the year. The loss of both of their coordinators, who are both doing pretty admirable jobs in Arizona and in Indianapolis. I think it shows, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. I think they do miss Shane Steichen, and they're kind of figuring out, what are we, right? Like, what is the identity of this offense? And as they piece that together, it's going to take some time for them to be the dominant team, but they were winning. This is a little speed bump for them, but overall, I'm not concerned about Philadelphia. And the Jets, if I was to say that you were going to be 3-3 even with Rodgers at the bye with that gauntlet of a schedule, I would have said mission accomplished. To do this whole thing with Zach Wilson, there's not enough props to go around there for that Jets organization.
No doubt. And 3-3, and they had the Chiefs. I mean, that game they had won. Close. Of course, there was some fluky things late, the bad penalty calls and whatnot, which we don't need to dissect play by play. But the bottom line was, if they fell behind at 16-0 in that game, looked like it was on its way to being a rout, and came back and made a game of it, that really showed that things boded well for them going forward. And since then, 2 wins under their belt.
And taking care of business in Denver as well after the whole Hackett controversy. I think that was much needed. And, we know the situation going on there in Denver. Not great. Bro, I want to go to the Monday night game. I want to talk about the end of the week here in week 6. I want to talk about the Cowboys and Chargers because you want to talk about 2 teams that I know the Cowboys won 20-17. I know the Cowboy fans have this crazy hysteria as they normally do every season, but I'm sorry, I was not impressed in this game. I thought this was a game that both teams played very poorly. This is one of the worst Justin Herbert games I've seen in a long time. And
yeah, agreed.
And the Cowboys defense, they kind of came back to life after getting the butt whipping that they had it there against San Francisco. But what they have, about 11 penalties for the team for the game. They just look undisciplined. Their clock management still isn't great. I mean, that weird situation at the end of the first half where they have a timeout that McCarthy cancels to then kick the field goal when he could have had Dak take a shot at the end zone because they still had a timeout in their back pocket. That was a whole weird situation because it's do you trust your quarterback? I mean, that's a red alarm bell there. And, I think this is a team, their defense is great, right? Like, they're not maybe a San Francisco or Cleveland level, right? But they're a great defense, right? They're at least very good. But this offense, I think they get a lot of hype because of their quarterback is paid very high. They're the Cowboys. Outside of CeeDee Lamb, Bry, this offense has been a BB gun offense. I'm sorry. It's not that great. It's not that impressive. And now maybe we saw a couple things, a Brandon Cook sighting here in this game. So maybe that is kind of a possibility of a positive for what is to come. But through 6 weeks, I'm not impressed with this Dallas Cowboy offense in particular. I think they've been incredibly disappointing. I honestly didn't expect a ton out of them because I said, all right, you have CD, great. What happens if you go against a good defense like you did in San Francisco and they double them? Where's the ball going? You have absolutely no tight end threat. I think the loss of Dalton Schultz, and you see what he's doing in Houston, has been understated. That's a big loss, particularly in the red zone. I had concerns about could Pollard be a straight up bell cow back that's consistent every week. He hasn't proven that so far. And this offensive line, it's okay, but it's nowhere near what it was in Dak's first few years. I came away from this game because, we always say, and maybe you'll talk about the other side, we always say the Chargers are going to charge it, right? Like that, there's no shock there. But this Cowboys team, hey, you might be 4-2. I'm not impressed so far of what you've done.
Well, you just look at a few of the games early in the season, right? And some of the scores 40-0 over the Giants, 38-3 over New England.
Right, terrible
It
team.
just looked like absolutely dominant football, but yes, partly against weak competition. But the other thing is I think the offensive issues got masked in those games because the defense not only played great, it scored and scored multiple times.
Can't rely on that.
So I mean, you had games where they were up a score or two, and the defense is giving you 2 extra scores to make the game look like they totally dominated. But like you said, you can't rely on that kind of production. And you saw what happened when they played the 49ers. They didn't look like a good defense at all. They got taken apart at every level. So I mean, we know the injury to the defensive back Diggs was obviously going to be a big deal. But they still have a serviceable defense. I think we definitely agree they can get after the quarterback, but they're not going to have games, routinely where the defense is going to be able to score multiple touchdowns like we saw early on. So, the offense in those games was like okay. I mean, the game against the Giants, Dak didn't have to do anything special because the defense just carried him. They were popping the ball out of Barkley's hands and running it into the end zone. That was the way that game went. So I totally agree. I think the offensive questions are definitely there for Dallas. The quarterback for sure, the offensive line at every level. I agree. And you look at a guy like Michael Gallup, they spent like a 5-year deal on him. He had been coming off a major injury. Good signs early in his career, but he's not a factor in this offense anymore. Like you said, we saw Cook's signing before that Monday night game. He was barely visible.
Nope.
Like you said, downgraded tight end. I mean, Jake Ferguson's okay, but he's not Dalton Schultz. I like Pollard, but questions of can he handle a consistent 25 carries a game. So I agree. I think all the offensive concerns are very fair for this team.
Now, I'm being the QB fair person here, it feels like, on this show so far. I know there might be some Cowboy fans, if you're watching, you're kind of screaming at the screen. Well, Dak had a great game. This was probably Dak's best offensive game of the season. I will give him that. He made the plays when he needed to for the most part. But, they could have ended the game there and not even gave the ball back to Justin Herbert. He has Pollard basically wide open on a little bit of a wheel rat at the end of the game in the fourth quarter. He straight up misses him. So, there are still moments there, even in Dak's best game of the season, that it's like, okay, your best game of the season is 272 yards against a bottom 2 pass defense. So it's like the Chargers might spend a ton of money on their defense, but it's not really that great. Everybody knows it. And I'll give the credit where it's credit's due. He played well. And particularly, I think a positive sign in this game was he played well with his legs. He ran the ball. He had a rushing touchdown in this game. He got consistently out of trouble there and got positive gains for this offense to keep the chains moving. That is something I will give him. But if I'm doing an analysis here so far of basically the first third of the season, I've not been impressed with him. I've not been impressed with the offense. And I think we talked about it after week 1. they beat the Giants 40-0. That offense was pretty terrible in week 1. They were not good. Dak threw for under 160 yards or something like that. They were not good. And I think that is something to watch here going forward, because the only good competition, great competition that they've played so far is San Francisco, and they got bludgeoned, lost by 32.
Right.
Every other team, Bri, that they've played, they're average to 500 like the Jets now are, to the worst in the league, like the Patriots
Right.
and the Cardinals and the Giants.
And they lost. They got beat soundly by
Yeah,
Arizona.
like even the Chargers, they're on a downslope here. They're 2-3 facing the Chiefs this coming week, so they're not going to be a good team either. This is something to watch, and I think Dallas fans, of course, are getting a little crazy. They're looking at the Eagles' schedule and going, "Oh, it gets way difficult. You know, we might be able to move up." That doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, even if they won this division, you got to go against the Eagles and the Niners, or maybe even the Lions for the playoffs. You're going to beat all 3 of them to get into the Super Bowl? I just don't see that happening right now. I just don't.
Yeah, my last point before we move on to another game is on Dak. I feel like, fans want to make him someone that he's not. And it seems like there's both ends of the spectrum when it comes to Dak Prescott. You've got fans that want to call him an elite quarterback, and you got people who want to put him like bottom of the league. The reality is he's not either one.
He's average.
He's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
That's what he is. I mean, at this point, it's almost a decade into his career. I feel like we kind of know what he is as a player. He's not going to be an elite quarterback. He's not going to be the reason that you win, but he's not bad enough that you just want to cast him aside. He's an average to a little bit above average quarterback. I feel like not enough people get that. They want to elevate him into top tier quality, or there's the people who want to say he's basically the equivalent of Zach Wilson, and he's not either one.
No, he sits anywhere at his best for me in the 9th best quarterback in the league to anywhere 15 or 16. Like, he sits right in that range, and that is good enough to win games, to even win playoff games, but you need superior talent around him to boost him. And when you've taken away pieces over the years and years on this offense in particular, well, you better hope that defense stays healthy. I mean, hey, they had Michael Parsons and Stephon Gilmore. They're 2 top guys on defense. Both make the 2 ending plays there to end that game. I did, before we want to switch to the next game, I did want to get your quick thoughts on Justin Herbert, because this is a thing I posed here at the beginning of the season when we started 1st and 10 this NFL season. And Bright, I don't think, we could look at Herbert and go, would you start your franchise with him? He'd be one of the top guys, right? You would pick, right? You would easily put this guy as probably a top 7 QB in the league. At some point, the rubber's got to meet the road here, Brian. And I understand that the Chargers charger, and do they have the right coach and all that stuff, but now you get an offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore. He had all his stats across the board, for the most part, go up. He had that great game against the Vikings. But it just seems, when it comes down to it, when you get into these 4th quarter and overtimes, have you looked at his record in 4th quarter overtimes? It's terrible. When he needs a comeback drive, when his team's down by 1 score, he doesn't do it. And I think the marker of it, if I go into a game and I have maybe an Allen or a Mahomes or a Joe Burrow when he's healthier, or even Jalen Hurts, right? They get into it on one of those last drives there at the end of the game. 2 minutes left. Can we drive the field, at least get a field goal to tie? I go, that defense is pretty screwed probably. Like, these guys are going to get down the field and they're going to score. There is never a moment, whether it was against the Cowboys this past week or any other time, where I look at Herbert, especially when he's playing average to good teams, and go, yeah, he's going to drive the field. I go, nah, he's going to get sacked. And he's not going to throw a bad pick, but he's going to get sacked. There's going to be some incompletions, and they're going to go 4 and out, and that's what's going to happen. We saw it play out in week 1 with Miami. I had no fear that he was going to come back there. He had the same exact situation here against Dallas. And I'm watching this game at the end, Brad, and I swear to God, they didn't even mention it until the end of the game. And I go, I feel like I've seen this movie before. Like, this exact movie, Dallas versus the Chargers, 20-17, and Herbert can't come back. And as the game ends, I think it was Joe Buck goes, yeah, 2 years ago in 2021, the Cowboys beat the Chargers 20-17. And I went, oh my God, it's the same game that we just watched 2 years later. I mean, what is your feeling at this point on Justin Herbert? Because he's the second highest paid quarterback in football behind Joe Burrow. The production has to matter at some point. I don't care what's going around you. There's talent. You need to win.
I couldn't agree more. And you look at that Cowboy game, and he has the ball in that last drive, and what happens? Interception. And that I just feel like is what we've seen all too often. What it comes down to is right now you can firmly say Justin Herbert is not a winning quarterback.
He's not.
I mean, he has all the talent in the world. He has all the physical tools, anything that all the scouting and anything like that that you would want. You'd say this is the guy you want to play the position. But like you said, at some point the winning has to start. Like at the end of the day, you play the game to win, not to throw for a certain amount of
Yep.
yards and touchdowns and all that. That's all nice, but you got to win. He's lacking in that department. I just see a player that his the greatest strength that he has with his throwing arm, I think becomes a detriment because
Yes.
I just
We see
when
this
I
with
watch
Allen
him,
too.
I see a guy who's looking to throw the ball like as hard as he possibly can on every play, and there's times where like you need more touch on the ball and he's just throwing it with too much velocity. Like I just don't think he has all of that down as a quarterback yet. And you said like when you get paid that kind of money, you're one of the top paid quarterbacks. You got to have better results than what we've seen so far. I mean, it's all well and good that he put up a nice stat line against the Vikings, who have a dreadful defense, but with his line against the Cowboys, just flat out not good enough.
No.
And when I was watching, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like there are throws that are just off target, and I'm saying to myself, he leaves me wanting more. And
Absolutely.
maybe he has it in him, right? Like maybe he'll turn it around, but to this point, it's not a winning football player. That's the bottom
No, I
line.
think it's well said. That's exactly the perfect analogy for it. He leaves you wanting more. You see it. Like it's there. He has all the measurables in terms of physicality, the height, the strength, the arm strength, the accuracy, everything. It's right there. He even has a little bit of mobility too. His mobility is very underrated. It's all right there. You go, God, this guy could be a top 3 QB in the league. Like he has superior elite arm talent. He's got the mind. He's a very, he was what, a 4.4.2 GPA. He's a biology major. He's extremely smart. But for some reason, when it comes into these clutch moments, some guys have it and some guys don't. And so far to this point in his career, he has not had it. I understand there's other things around him, but you have to win. And I think the final point I will say here is I think at the end of the day, it's out of Herbert's hands, right? But we'll look in Denver. Sean Payton's going to regret this by the end of the season. He could have waited another year because I guarantee Brandon Staley's going to get fired after the season. And he could have had this nice LA Chargers job with Herbert, an offensive minded coach with Herbert and all that talent. And it would have served both Herbert and Payton way better. And it is Payton put himself by rushing and going for the money. And that is the situation he's left with, a disaster in Denver. We won't get into that whole thing. But that is an element I do think about the Chargers of, man, what could have been? What could have been, man, if they had Sean Payton here next year and what it could have been, and both of them will suffer because of that decision. Brian, do you have a final game? I know you want to stick locally, I believe, for week 6. Did you want to go to Giants Bills?
Let's just touch on it. We don't need to spend too much time because we know how much of a dumpster fire season this has been for the Giants, but I feel like we
Poor
need to
Giant
get
fans.
into it at least on some level. And I mean, this was kind of an interesting game, not for necessarily the best reasons. I mean, the final score is 14-9. The Bills went into this game as like a 15-point favorite, and I think
Yeah.
just about everybody in America would have said, "Oh, the Bills will cover this number." Giants playing Tyrod Taylor, still all the issues on the offensive line. Saquon Barkley does return to action, did show some signs in this game,
He did.
as did the Giants as a team. Like, this was a game early on, they're up 6-0. Somehow this defense was like stifling Josh Allen
Yeah.
and the Bills. It was like, what is going on
6
here?
nothing at
I mean, the
halftime. I
Bills
mean, yikes.
6-0 at halftime, and then of course you have the debacle from the Giants where they opt to run the ball there, where they don't have any timeouts, and they hand the ball to Barkley. He gets
I don't.
stuffed,
I
time
was
runs out without
screaming at
getting
the.
a
I'm not
field
even a
goal.
Giants fan. I'm screaming at the TV screen. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing right
Yeah.
there?
It's really baffling. I mean, we can go so many levels with this. Like, we can go to this game, we can go to the Giants season as a whole, because if we rewound the tape here to our first show of the season, had me coming on here and telling you that the Giants were going to be one of the playoff teams in the NFC. Now, I don't think you had them.
No.
I think you were actually a little more down on them, so that's a credit to you. But for me and anyone else who thought this team was playoff material coming into the year, we look bad now. Because, I mean, you talk about a season that has just gone in flames. I mean, we've talked about how offensive line play can derail a season. I know there's other issues. Daniel Jones obviously has not played at his best, but the single biggest culprit on this team is an offensive line that just can't
Terrible.
play. I mean,
Awful.
it's been embarrassing to watch.
It's
It's
terrible.
just injury after injury. They probably had their best game last week that featured Justin
They
Pugh
signed off the
coming in. They had
couch.
picked him up off the street, straight off the couch, as his
That
intro
was
said
great.
on the Sunday night broadcast. Actually, like, kind of held his own. I mean, it was like a better
He
than
played
most
well.
Giant offensive line performances. So this was a game that somehow was winnable, that came down to the end. We know the play in the end zone with Waller, where yes, he probably got held, but it comes down to the Giants offense. Look, they played better in this game with Tyrod Taylor under center. I mean,
I
he made
agree.
some throws to Darius Slayton. I think you could make the argument he handles the offensive line ineptitude better than Daniel Jones
Yep.
does, and looks like he's going to get another start coming up this weekend also, which I think plays to their benefit. But I mean, what else can you say? This Giants team, it's just been a total disaster from the offensive line to everything in between. I could not have imagined it would be this bad, but that's where we are right now.
Yeah, I mean they're really bad. I should have I flirted with in our first show of putting them in last and putting the Commanders above them, and then I decided against it and I left the Commanders in last place. I should have went with my initial gut. I didn't know it would be this bad, but I had a feeling it wouldn't be great because to me this team they maxed out last year, right? Like that was the best, that was the most juice you could squeeze out of this orange, and that was it. And I think they had a really bad offseason. I don't think they made a lot of great sightings. I thought it was a horrible idea the way they treated Barkley, kind of alienated him for a little bit. Then he comes back for similar money. I thought that whole situation was weird. I said this, and I know we have a lot of Giant friends who completely disagree with me, and I'm not even rubbing it in their face now. But I'm just trying to say, I said Daniel Jones was a bad signing. That was a bad signing to give this guy $40 million. Now he's injured right now. I know it's not all his fault. The team has been terrible. But he is part of that team. He's the leader of the team. The quarterback is the most important player on any football roster. And he is not worth $40 million. And he is not a franchise quarterback. He's not. I've been saying this almost the entire time. And last season, okay, he played well. He played his two best games against that previously mentioned Vikings defense that is terrible. And outside of that, he did not play any really great games. He had 15 passing touchdowns last year. And I said, if you're going to franchise anyone, franchise him. Make him play another year to prove he's worth it. And you know what? If he proves me and everybody else wrong, and he has another great year, he has a better year, hell yeah, pay him the money. But make him prove it, because we've seen one-year wonders every single season. Usually one-year wonders are guys that can throw more than 15 touchdowns. This was not the guy. And yes, is this I don't want to just pile all on Daniel Jones. Is this an organizational failure? Absolutely. The ability of this, or I should say the inability of this Giants organization to get skilled players on this offense is nothing short of an absolute disaster. I mean, it is, I've never seen, and I'm not trying to have hyperbole here, I've never seen the last 5 years an offense that has had top picks, has had chances at free agency, has a desirable destination for free agents, and cannot pick guys. Remember Galladay, just as one of the many examples here. Nate Soldier on the offensive line. They cannot figure out this offense. And I look at every skill player. Who am I looking at? Wandale Robinson, who is he's okay, but at best he's a third wide receiver. There is no one on this offense. If you don't want to blame Jones completely, which I'm not going to, Barkley can't stay healthy. Andrew Thomas is your best offensive lineman by a mile. He's been out. Pugh starts at guard. He's got to switch to tackle in this game, and you did pull him right off the couch. It's been an organizational failure, and that includes Brian Daboll, because you know what? I know a lot of Giants fans have piled on him, I think, a little too much because they don't want to admit that they're kind of wrong on Daniel Jones. But Daboll's done a couple things. There's been a couple coaching gaffes this season. And you know what? I don't really like the way he has chewed out publicly his quarterbacks. I do not think that is a good look. He had the whole tablet situation there with Daniel Jones a couple weeks ago, then chewing out Tyrod there, which, yes, that was a mistake on Tyrod's part at the end of the first half. You do that in the locker room. You don't do that for the entire world to see, especially when your team is the dumpster fire the way they've been. And they were in the game there against Buffalo. They're awful. I mean, there's no other way to talk about it. And I don't know where you go from here, because with the Jones contract now, you're kind of trapped for at least one more year. So you're kind of in perpetuity for next year. There's so many ways to go. I think Kayvon Thibodeau has been a mess. And that is not even to speak about, I'm sure you want to, the whole Evan Neal thing that happened while we were gone. And the audacity he had. So it's been ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things there. I agree with your point on Daboll and his treatment of the quarterbacks. That, to me, has been a little bit out of line. But I'll say this big picture as far as the head coach is concerned. I don't think this franchise can afford another coaching change.
No,
So, I mean, as bad as this year might be, I mean, you've got to stick with him. I'm not going to say for another 5 years, but you cannot pull the plug, because you're just going to keep repeating the cycle where you bring in a coach. He has his best year the first year. We've seen it now. This is the third time.
Absolutely.
Where the first year they showed signs, like Ben McAdoo, first year, make the playoffs. Joe Judge comes in the first year. They had a chance to make the playoffs despite a losing record. Daboll last year was easily the best. I mean, he was coach of the year, rightfully so, and that's what gave people optimism going into year two. Now that this year has turned completely upside down, I'm sure there's going to be the thought out there, he's not the guy. But you cannot keep going with this cycle. It's just going to turn into a vicious cycle. You're never going to have stability, and you're never going to win. So I feel like he showed enough last year that you've got to roll this year with him, and next year at least, and see what happens, and get a functional offensive line first and foremost.
Please,
because
you're
just not going to operate with what they're running out there.
No,
yeah.
I mean, it is terrible. It's one of the worst offensive lines in the league, and I think the reason why Tyrod, he looked a little more comfortable, is Jones is a good runner, but he's a good straight line north and south runner. He doesn't have a little bit of the scramble ability that I feel like Tyrod has, and I think that is necessary with the way this offensive line is played. But before we go to our picks, I did want to flip to the other side of it. What do you make of the Bills? I mean, this is a team that should be a juggernaut. They've had games. I mean, look what they did to Miami. Just destroyed them. And then they have these other games where, like, they go to London and they're listless against the Jags. This game, they don't have any points to the fourth quarter. They barely beat the Giants, and they have a goal line stand at the end. And only for, just kind of the common knowledge that you're not going to call 2 pass interference calls there in a row at the end of the game is the only way they escape with a win at home. What do you make of them and Josh Allen, the Diggs drama that's gone on? They're just a weird team.
They are. I mean, I think the way you said it summarizes it best. To me, when I look at the Bills this season, they've been 2 totally different teams, right? Like, they've had 3 games where you look at them and you say, this might be the best team in football. Yeah. The game against Miami, they destroyed the Raiders. Not that that's a high-quality opponent. They destroyed Washington in a game on the road. Those are 3 games. It's not like they won by a score or 2. No, they won like 38-10 on average in
Mm-hmm.
those 3 games. So when you look at the way they played there, you say this is an absolute Super Bowl contender, bar none. But then the other side of it is how they played against the Jets week 1 and how they played against the Giants most recently and the game that you reference in London. So it's kind of hard to know on a given week which Bills team is going to show up and which Josh Allen are we going to see, because that's kind of what it comes down to. Like, Josh Allen has been an elite quarterback when this team has been clicking. When it hasn't, he's looked very pedestrian. So it really is kind of hard to know. I mean, I still think they are at least a good team, certainly upside of being a great team. But there are some clunkers in here where you do have to question, and there's definitely things to question offensively. Like, I feel like they rely too heavily on Stephon Diggs. Like,
It's
you
like
look
they're force
early in this
feeding him.
game against the Giants early on, it was like 8 out of the first 10 passes they were targeting him and nobody else. Like, they have other playmakers. Gabe Davis is a playmaker. He's capable of big plays down the field. I think they have serviceable players at tight end. The running game with James Cook has gotten going a little bit this
A little
season.
bit.
So I think they're at their best when they're using all of the pieces. When it's just Allen staring down Diggs, that limits the offense. As good as Diggs is, and he's great, we know he's great. I think they're at their best when Allen is using all the weapons at his disposal and throwing the ball and running it himself. And they were at their best too when they were balanced, right? When Cook was running the ball well, that was like an element that's been missing the last couple of years from this offense, where they just don't have that element to their offense. So, I mean, I still think definitely a playoff team, definitely a chance to get to a Super Bowl, but you got to throw some questions in there because of some of these games that they've had.
Yeah, it's really going to come down to, as it often does in this league, of I do believe they're a playoff team. It's going to be who they play, because they have particular matchups that are suited to them, and if they play some other teams, it's not going to go well. And it's a weird thing in this division, right? Because like I feel like for the most part they dominate Miami for the most part, but then they play the Jets and they just do not play well. So like the Patriots are done. I mean they're way out of it. But like if you have those top 3 teams there in the AFC East right now, it's a weird order of who beats who and how all that goes down, because I also feel like Miami normally beats the Jets beat the Bills beat Miami. So it all kind of goes around in this weird triangle they have going there. And I think a problem when you have a little bit of these diva receivers, 16 targets Diggs got in this game. He had 10 catches. That's not a model recipe to win. And they have some other players. They're not feeding Gabe Davis. You drafted a first round pick in Dalton Kincaid. You have Dawson Knox. Use these guys. And they're not spreading the ball around effectively. They were a little successful, as you mentioned, with the run game, but they don't do that consistently. They're very pass happy on this team for whatever reason it is. It's like a Herbert syndrome. They're obsessed with, oh, they have a QB with a huge arm, throw, and they don't think about anything else. They're a roller coaster, and they better figure it out going here into the next third of this season, because right now this team ain't going far into the playoffs playing the way they are. Brian, let's go over to some picks. If that's all you had to say there with the Bills.
Yeah, I think we're to get into the picks.
So let's do week 7 here. We already kicked off, of course. We don't have to talk about it a lot, but there was a Thursday night game, of course. The Jags, they beat the Saints. I don't really have anything to mention here. I mean, we talked about it before we started recording. The Jags, hey, they're 5-2. Props to them. This was my team to win the conference because of how soft their schedule is. Maybe they'll reach their potential as the season goes on. To me, they need a pass rusher at the deadline. This defense is not that great. Trevor Lawrence has kind of played subpar to this point, in my opinion, for the first third of the season, but credit to them. They go on the road into New Orleans, into the Dome. They pull this one out at the end of the game, and the Saints on the other side of it, they start off 2-0. They've been a disaster by now, dropping to 3-4 here after their 31-24 loss. They're in cap hell going into this offseason. I don't know if you've looked at the details of their cap situation. It is the worst in the league. I mean, they're in a lot of trouble. So, would you make of that Thursday night game?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Jags looked like they were on their way to a runaway, and honestly, I could not have seen a Saints comeback at all in store, and they wind up knotting this game up
Yeah.
24 apiece. So early on, I mean, the offense looked completely lost. Like, you have Derek Carr, we've watched for a long time, played a lot of games in this league. It just doesn't look like he's in sync with his offensive
Doesn't look right.
playmakers. I mean, it did
No.
get better in the second half. They had that one nice drive where they score on 3 plays, touchdown to Michael Thomas. It's not like it's an offense without ability. You have Alvin Kamara back now. You have Chris Olave, who we like a lot. Michael Thomas has been a great player in this league in his past, so I don't think they're bereft of skill position talent. Just like you said, it doesn't seem like things are falling into place there, and Derek Carr doesn't look like he's going to be able to lead them to big things. So nice that they made a comeback of it. It seemed like Jacksonville kind of took their foot off the gas after, they had a big lead and they wind up holding on. But I have been impressed with Jacksonville at least to
Okay.
some degree. I think Travis Etienne is really
He's
on a
been good.
nice run
It's been a
here. I
good
think two
season.
touchdowns now, 3 straight games. So he's looking really good. I like some of the pieces, Christian Kirk on his go ahead touchdown.
Welcome
That
back,
reminded me
Christian
of like a
Kirk.
Tyreek Hill play.
Yeah.
It was like a short 5 yard cross that he just ran full speed to the end
Yeah,
zone.
for
So
sure.
that was impressive. But we'll see going forward. They're definitely better than I thought. I mean, before the season, I kind of looked at Jacksonville and Detroit and I said, I want them to prove it to me. And you know what? They have proven it. I think the Lions more so than Jacksonville. Lions have just been outstanding. Jags have had some warts, but overall, definitely both teams moving in the right
They
direction.
need another pass rusher on the other side of Josh Allen. He's having a great season. And you know what? As a former Ram, shout out Darius Williams, D. Will, playing great at the cornerback position for Jacksonville. Shout out to him. I'm so glad that he's having a fantastic season. He deserves it. I miss that man on the Rams, just as a selfish note. Brian, let's get to the picks here. Week 7, proper Week 7. We'll start on, of course, Sunday, the 1 o'clock games. Lions, as you just mentioned, going into Baltimore, a matchup here of a 5-1, 4-2 team. For me, taking Baltimore here. I think they're going to win this game. The Lions, I think, proved last week after all the talk. Oh, they don't play well outside of their dome. They went down and dominated the Bucks. But I think Baltimore is an underrated team. I think they have not reached their apex of what they could be. And at home, if this is in Detroit, I'd probably pick Detroit. But I'm picking the Ravens here to win this game.
That I'm going to admit that surprised me a little bit. I thought your pick
I
here
think
would
it'll
have been
will.
Detroit. I know you've been high on them. The Ravens, typically, you're a little more wishy-washy on. And this was a game probably more so than most where I kind of went back and forth. I think
Me
at
too.
first glance I went Ravens, and then I thought about it and I'm like, no, I'm going Lions. I think they have really been impressive this year. You mentioned like the Bucks aren't in any great shakes by any means, but to go on the road and beat them as soundly as they did, I feel like the Lions are now a team that you can trust are going to play well on a
Yeah.
week to week basis. And I know the competition
They're good.
hasn't been great, but your guy, your former guy, Jared
He's
Goff,
been good.
this is the best football he's played. He's been outstanding, using his full complement of players. Another ex-Ram to shout out is the receiver, Josh Reynolds, has
Shout
been
out
a
Josh
nice
Reynolds.
complementary piece
Yeah.
go along with Amon-Ra St. Brown back from injury. The nice duo in the backfield. Now Montgomery's out and Gibbs is back, so that's been kind of a shuffling of the deck. But I mean, Montgomery has just been great. And the thing that has elevated, I think, this Lions
Say
offense
it.
has been the tight end,
There it
Sam
is.
Laporta.
There it is. That's one of my
He
favorite
has
picks in this last draft, and I'm so glad it's coming to fruition.
remind me playing his college ball
I think
where?
I believe he's an Iowa kid. He's an Iowa kid there,
Oh, that's right.
and he has been nothing short of amazing at for his rookie year. I've loved him, man.
And you think about like they had a big time tight end that they invested a first round pick in, TJ Hawkinson, traded him in division, and to get a replacement like the next
Who's
year
better?
is really kudos to them and as well as he's played and the Dan Campbell how much he's changed the culture there. It's been very, very impressive what they've done. I think they go into Baltimore and it's not gonna be easy
It's gonna be a
because
good
the
game.
Ravens are no slouch. but I just love how the Lions have played. I think they get another win
No,
here.
that's totally fair. I could see this game going either way, and not to take another shot at the Giants, but you want to talk about a team that this is the exact opposite of the Giants in the Detroit Lions. The drafting, the quality that this team has added, the free agents, the veterans they've added, superb stuff that they have going on there. They definitely deserve all the credit in the world. The Las Vegas Raiders go into Chicago, and this is a game where it's like, Justin Field is banged up. Is he gonna play? The Bears, they've looked better offensively before he got hurt in the last few weeks, but they're still terrible. The Raiders are somehow 3-3, but they're not a good team. They've shuffled three different quarterbacks in there now. Like, what's going on there? What is this team? I'm struggling with what to pick here. I think I'm just gonna go. I think I'm gonna go Raiders because I can't trust the Bears, but like I don't feel good about it. Like this feels like a 14-9 game. Like this does not seem like it's gonna be a good game, but I guess I'm picking Las Vegas.
Yeah, it's one where you definitely can't feel good either way. I'm gonna go the other way here. It looks like we're gonna have two backup quarterbacks. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo, I think, has already been ruled out with his back injury, so I guess that means Aiden O'Connell, maybe Brian Hoyer. Who knows where they're gonna go
I think it
as the
actually might
starting
be Hoyer.
quarterback.
I think they might start Hoyer.
Might be Hoyer. And the Bears, I actually heard, are going to go with like a guy who played Division II college
Yeah,
football,
I
so
don't know.
that
I don't
that
know.
should be interesting. I'll tell you, to me, this is a game where like the difference is going to be some fluky like special teams play where there's like a fumble that gets run for a touchdown, and that's the difference because neither of these offenses are going to do much of anything, but I'll take the home team Bears. We saw them have a nice game there against Washington on Thursday night. They lost last week against Minnesota. They've shown some signs of life after just a dormant start. And like you said, the Raiders are 3-3. Last two games against New England, and I can't even remember before that. But they're not a good team,
They beat
as you said.
the Packers before that, and it wasn't
The
really a
Packers,
great
there you
game.
go, not a good team.
Yeah.
So I'm taking Chicago.
Yeah, it's like we like to be accurate here and current on this show. So, and I if I'm pronouncing this name wrong, I'm sorry out there. Tyson Bajan, he's already confirmed to start. Justin Fields is out, and Garoppolo, as you said, is already confirmed out, and Brian Hoyer is confirmed as the starter. So. It's gonna be a putrid game. I mean, it's just gonna be terrible. And
Yeah.
you know what? When this guy came in last week, for the Bears, he was not that great. So I do not expect much out of a team that's already not that talented. So
Yeah,
Chicago,
get the ball to DJ Moore.
exactly.
That's all the recipe.
Do
Get
that.
it to
Get me some
DJ.
fantasy points. And you know what? People of Chicago, it's gonna be okay. Between you and the Panthers being two of the worst teams in the league, you might have the top two overall picks in the draft. You're gonna be all right. I mean, like you have to pick the right guys next year, but it's going to be okay. It's just going to be a really rough year. Cleveland goes against Indianapolis. They go into Indianapolis. This is another game that's weird because it's like Deshaun Watson is very in the air right now. He's questionable. He's had kind of this bruise of his AC joint, which is a serious thing. The rotator cuff there. They said they talked to guys on baseball teams about this injury. Whenever you hear that stuff, that is not a good sign. And so we don't know really he's going to play. Is PJ Walker going to be in there again? And of course, Anthony Richardson. The news came out this week. Unfortunately, he had some moments in his rookie year, the fourth overall pick in the draft. He's out for the season now as he's going to undergo shoulder surgery. I think 4 of the 5 or 3 of the 4 games he played in, he left with an injury. Not a great way to start your career. But, a game here, again, of might be 2 backups here. I just think I'm going to trust the Browns. This defense is fantastic. And I can't give them all the praise at the beginning of the show going against a backup quarterback, even though I do have respect for Minshew. But I think the Browns are going to win this game. I think it's going to be another ugly game, low scoring, maybe a 17-16, but I think the Browns pull it out.
Yeah, we got back-to-back games here with two backup
Yeah.
quarterbacks. I mean, some of these games are it's not going to be a great
Welcome to week
watch.
7.
I've got up. There you go. I've got upset alert here. I'm taking Indianapolis.
Okay.
I feel like the game last week, big emotional win for the Browns. Sometimes those kind of games take a lot out of you. Next game, you go out on the road, you think you got it against a backup quarterback, but one that's very experienced.
He
He's
is.
played for a bunch of teams. You kind of know what you're getting. They've got a nice 1-2 punch in the backfield. Jonathan Taylor back, and Zach
Zach
Moss
Moss has
is
been
like top
great.
5 in the league
He's
in
been
rushing
great.
yards. So I'm gonna say they ride that running game. They're at home. Give me the Colts upset.
I like that. I think that's going to be a good either way game. It'll be a close game. Hopefully, we'll get a little more excitement out of that. Bills Patriots. I don't think there's going to be any excitement out of this. I'm picking the Bills. I mean, this is super
No.
obvious. The Patriots are literally one of the worst teams in the league, which I never thought I would say that in a Bill Belichick team. All I will say before I go to you, if the Bills play an offensive game against this Patriots team with all their defensive guys hurt that they just played against the Giants, ooh, I'm going to come in with a rant next week's show. That's all I'm saying. Taking the Bills in a landslide.
Yeah, I think this is a game where we get version A of the Bills, which translates to
Yes.
the A grade, and I think they're gonna handle it. I mean, New England, we don't need to spend much
They
time
are
on it, but it's
terrible.
just been an out and out disaster. Of course, they beat the Jets like they always do, but that is their lone win of the season.
Yeah.
No other wins to show for it. And they've had a lot of disasters. You had Bill Belichick after the one game say they basically have to start over. You may have
Yeah.
heard
Yeah, a
that
couple
post
weeks ago
game
we said
clip,
that.
which is which was interesting because they followed up with Bill, like, just for reference, have you ever had to do that? It's like, yeah, I've done it before. And I'm thinking, like, when has he ever had to start
Never.
over 5 weeks into a season?
Never.
He had Brady for, yeah. So I mean, maybe in his previous tour duty with the Browns. I mean, I don't know. But bottom line is, right now, the Patriots are going nowhere fast, and I think the Bills will be up to their A game and win this game handily. In fact, let's make it the lock of the week because I don't
There
see a
you
lot of
go.
candidates for lock
That's
of the
what I
week.
like.
So there you go.
I
Lock of the
love it.
week.
We're back on the show, and let's submit that lock of the week. I haven't gotten to mine yet, but I love that. Commanders Giants. Again, not a lot of time here. Picking the Commanders. I understand it's a division game, but Taylor's probably going to play in this game. They did look a little better with the Giants. They're another terrible team. I think the Commanders, they kind of found something against Atlanta last week that they had in the first 2 weeks of the season. I think that continues. I think they win this game.
Yeah, I feel like this is a game where you're going to get a decent amount of giant picks because it's like, well, they played the Bills tough. You
Yeah.
know, Barkley's second game back, maybe get some more continuity on the offense. It's a divisional game. Washington's kind of a meh, they're okay, they're not great. So let's give the Giants the win. But until they actually get in the win column, and we know they
Yep.
did in that wild comeback in Arizona, there's not going to be too many wins to show for it. I think Washington is a decent team. I think we'll be able to handle the Giants. Sam Howell, he's had a couple clunkers this year, but he's also played pretty well
I agree with that.
in quite a few games. So, yeah.
Go to the Falcons going into Tampa. I think Tampa's going to win this game. I think they're going to bounce back. The Falcons they'll be in the playoff race. I picked them to win this division. The NFC South is going to be super tight here, outside of the Panthers. But I think the Bucks and Baker, who played really bad, he even said that last week himself that he sucked. I think it'll be a nice bounce back game at home. I think they're going to win it. It'll be close because it's a division game, but I see the Bucks pulling this one out.
Yeah, you look at that division and it's like, who are you going with to win it?
We knew
You
it was going to be
probably the
bad.
your choice here to win this game. That probably, I mean, right now
Yeah.
before I get to my pick, you had to pick a team to win that division. Are you going Tampa right now? Are you going Saints? Are you going Atlanta? I mean, it's obviously not Carolina. So where are you going?
If you held a gun to my head right now to make this pick, it feels like the Bucks, but I did pick Atlanta before the season, so I guess I would have to stick with that if I personally pick, but it kind of feels like it's leaning the needle here with the Bucks. This game, by the end of the season, this game is going to be, as you said, huge. So whoever wins this might be the one that wins it all.
Yeah, I'm going with the Falcons here. We talked about before the season. Neither of us had very nice things to say about the Bucks. Obviously, they've had a couple games that have exceeded expectations, but I think the Falcons, that running game, Bijan Robinson, already such an impressive player.
He's
It
been
seemed
great.
like they kind of unlocked Kyle Pitts last week,
Finally,
got him in the end zone for the
welcome to the
first time
NFL. I
this
mean,
season.
like,
It's like I don't know what the issue is. Like, the guy's clearly a weapon. They throw to Jonnu Smith more at tight end than they do Kyle Pitts. It's kind of puzzling. I mean, I don't have any great love for Desmond Ritter,
No.
nor do I for Baker Mayfield. I think it's obviously a close game, but I'm going to take Atlanta.
That's fair. The 4:05 games start off the afternoon games, late afternoon, with the Steelers and the Rams. I think it's a game the Steelers are going to win. The Rams historically just do not play well against Pittsburgh. They had a really bad first half against Arizona last week, had an excellent second half, but down two running backs in this game. The offensive line has been shuffled all season. No Kyron Williams, probably to about week 10. He had a fantastic game last week. They also probably are not going to have Ronnie Rivers, their backup running back in this, so it's going to be a Zach Evans slash maybe Myles Gaskin that they signed this week. They also brought back Darrell Henderson to the practice squad. So it's going to be a lot of shuffling pieces there. And this Steelers offense, not great, but this defense is fantastic. And I think it's going to overwhelm this Rams offensive line. It'll be a very low scoring game. Going to probably literally be like 17-13, but I'm taking Pittsburgh in this one.
The Rams have to have exceeded your expectations
For sure.
because this has at least looked like, at the very least, a decent team, and it's
They're okay.
sometimes this year a pretty good team.
Yeah.
I mean, I know before the year you had very, very low
Very low.
expectations. They probably couldn't have been much lower. And I mean, this offense in particular has been impressive. Now, yeah, it's a blow losing Kyron
That's
Williams, who has
bad.
just
Yeah,
been
it hurts.
outstanding.
It
I mean,
hurts.
I don't think you could have seen this coming, but I feel like you pointed out a lot of the negatives, the offensive line, this passing game. I mean, you got two legitimate weapons now with Cooper Cup back and looking like Cooper Cup of old. I mean, he hasn't missed a beat.
Nope.
And Puka Nakua, even with Cup back, is still getting
He's nice.
targets and making plays.
And Tutu Atwell's
So
played well as well.
there you go. And you got a tight end, Tyler Higbee, who's capable of making plays. I think Stafford has plenty of weapons. I get it. TJ Watt and company can make it tough on them, but I just think the Rams have enough offensive firepower that they're going to be able to take this one.
That's fair. I mean, the only way I see them winning is if McVay actually learned from the Cincinnati game and understands that you have to slide protection to an elite pass rusher, because that's what you're going to see this week. So do not leave guys one-on-one, because that is not going to go well. Arizona plays Seattle. They go into Seattle, up to Seattle, I should say. Arizona, they've been feisty. They're 1-5, but they're not like these other 1-5 teams like New England or the Giants. They've been in games, man. They've played well. I mean, Jonathan Gannon's got these guys playing, but Seattle played a good game last week, really outplayed the Bengals. It was really the Bengals' two kind of excellent red zone stands on their defense that ended up winning that game. I think Seattle's talent is way superior. They're going to win this game. It'll be close because it's a division game, but Seattle's going to take this one.
I kind of feel the same way. Like against the spread, I think I'm inclined to take Arizona. Looks like it's about 8 points right now,
Yeah.
but I don't see Arizona having enough to win it outright. But I totally agree. I mean, like coming into the season, the way you talked about the Cardinals was like they were going to be one of the worst teams of all time. Like that's how bad they were going to be, and we haven't seen that. Like
No.
Josh Dobbs has at least been functional
He's
as a
been serviceable.
quarterback, and they do not look like a team that has been tanking by any means. They've been competitive in a lot of games. Now they don't have a good record. They only have one win, but I think they've played decently. So I think they'll, hold their own in this game, but Seattle in the end too much.
The 425 games kick off with the Packers going against the Broncos. I mean, these have been two very disappointing teams, and Denver has been putrid. I mean, they've been awful. I think if Denver loses this game, especially at home, it's going to kind of be a mini fire sale here at the trade deadline. We've already seen them let go of some guys. I am picking the Packers. I'm sorry, I cannot trust Denver until they can prove it to me. And even though the Packers have not played great, I think they bounce back and they get a win here.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean,
Yeah.
look, the Broncos, like you said, have been dreadful. There's no other way around it. I feel like they keep trying with like the quick fix, where it's like you bring in Russell Wilson thinking you got the rest of the team in place.
Yep.
Last year was an out and out disaster. Okay, well, the coach was awful. We'll bring in a guy who has been a great coach in the past, and that'll fix everything. No, that hasn't
Now the
fixed
defense is
everything. The
terrible.
offense has been a little exactly. So that's just the sign of a bad organization that they
Yeah,
can't get both units on the same wavelength, basically. So,
I agree.
look, this team is not any good. I do think this is a spot at home against a team that I also don't think is very good, where the Broncos can get a win. I think they pull this one out. I'm taking Denver. The Packers, it seemed like early on we were anointing Jordan Love. It's like, wow, look at Jordan Love. This team looks pretty good. And then it's like, oh, Jordan Love, not so great. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a long year for Green Bay, and I think the Broncos pull out this one by a field goal.
That's a bold pick going with Denver. Chiefs and Chargers. The Chiefs have dominated. Mahomes, in particular, has dominated the AFC West. I think that continues. I think they're going to beat up here on the Chargers. These teams normally have played close games in the fourth quarter and even into overtimes, but the Chargers, again, as we talked about earlier, I won't rehash it. They just cannot get over the hump. They have a lot of soul searching to do if they end up losing this game and drop into 2-4. I'm taking the Chiefs. I think they're going to win this game, and it'll be a good one. It'll be fun, but they're going to win it.
Yeah, we're in agreement here. I kind of see it playing out that way too, where it could be close at halftime, and the second half Chargers hang around, but in the end, Mahomes and company too much. Their offense has not
It's
by
not
any
played
means
well.
been clicking
It's
on
not.
all cylinders, and it doesn't seem like they throw the ball down the field hardly at
No,
all. I mean, it's
they don't
just
have any
all short
receivers.
passes.
They got nothing.
Exactly. I mean, at least Kelsey now looks like he's getting to full health. The first time I thought last game, the Thursday nighter against Denver, was the
Yeah,
first game that Kelsey looked like true
I
Kelsey.
agree with that.
So I think that's obviously a good sign going forward. Chiefs are the pick here.
Yeah, we could talk about them more in future weeks because there's a lot to say going forward there. Maybe the game of the week: Dolphins Eagles, two five
Yeah.
and one teams here. Miami kind of dominating. Abby, not great competition in the 5 wins that they've had, and the Eagles suffering that loss that we talked about earlier against the Jets last week. It's at home. It's in Philly. If this is a game where these two teams, depending on where you play, I would have picked the home team. I'm picking Philly here. If this is a Miami, I would have picked Miami. I'm taking Philly. I think they're going to have a bounce back game. I think that pass rush and that defense is going to be able to slow the Dolphins' offense a little bit. And that Dolphins defense is not good. And I think the Jalen Hurts in this offense for Philly, they're going to have a lot to prove after a pretty bad performance last week. I think they're going to win this game.
Yeah, it was definitely a rough one for Philly offensively. Like some of their top players, Devontae Smith dropping passes
Yeah,
uncharacteristically, Jalen Hurts with the 3 interceptions. I look at this game, I'd be very surprised if it's not a shootout. I think
I
both
hope so.
teams score at will, but I think when you get into a shootout with Miami, chances are you come up short. But I just think this Miami team
Wow.
is a well-oiled machine. They got shut down by the Bills. That was the only time. Every other game, they've been humming. You look at last week, they fell behind 14 nothing. It's like,
The
what's going on here
Panthers.
against Carolina? Before you know it, they're up by 21 points. It's
Yep.
like they can score that quickly. This offense is that dynamic, that fast. It's a show. I mean, you got to
It's
credit
something.
all parties involved. Mike McDaniel has clearly been just terrific. I mean, he just has an offensive mind like no other. Tua just playing great football. Tyreek Hill, probably the best receiver in the game right now. I think the
Incredible.
Dolphins win this game, and I think it's a statement win where people are going to be like, okay, now we really take this team seriously.
That would certainly be a statement win. I like the bold pick there. I mean, this team has amassed, I think, something like 3,000 offensive yards already. I mean, that doesn't even make sense how that's even possible. I mean, that offense has been fantastic. And finally, Bry, the Monday night game, Niners Vikings. It might be cheap, but this is my lock of the week here. I mean, like I think the Niners coming off a game where they barely lost in the end. They did not play their best football. They're gonna be angry here against Minnesota. It's a team that's a sub-bar team. There's no Justin Jefferson, of course. Poor Kirk Cousins is in for a long night. And this Niners team, I could see this being an absolute blowout, a tour de force in this game, given that the Niners kind of avoided the major injury bug. I think they win it outright handily here, taking the Niners.
Yeah, I'm taking the Niners. I feel like it's not going to be, one of these games where they win by 30 points just because, there are still some questions as far as the injuries go. We don't know for sure if McCaffrey and Debo will be in the lineup, but I do think the 49ers, with all their talent, will be able to bounce back and win this game against a Vikings team that's just going to be overmatched. I mean, you take Justin Jefferson away from that offense. They had a nice game last week. They were playing the Bears. They
The
actually
Bears.
have gotten some signs of life from the defense, right? They
Yeah,
had like that big strip sack that they took to the end zone. When do you ever see the Vikings defense make a
never.
play like that? Can't expect that against this 49er team. I'm taking the
Yeah, you
Niners.
haven't seen their defense make plays like that since like Jared Allen was there. Like otherwise, you just don't see that happen. But yeah, it's gonna be another great week. Very excited that it's gonna be backup quarterback competitions, a game of the week of the Dolphins and Philly. Some lopsided victories are probably going to happen as well here. I'm really excited, Brian. We're really glad that we got back to do this again. It's so good to be back. I hope. Hey, listen, if you've made it this far in the podcast, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate you. Of course, there'll be timestamps in the description below for you to jump around. And we'll be back next week. We'll be back in regular. That is the plan here. We don't want to do this too many times this season to kind of get away because there's so many NFL storylines. We don't want that to kind of be thrown by the wayside and escape us. Bri, before we get out of here, any final words you want to say? Anything that you want to promote, your Twitter or anything else? Of course, everything will be in the description down below.
Well, we spent a lot of today watching playoff baseball. I mean, it was quite an interesting day. The Phillies, as you and I both weren't, too upset about seeing
No,
them
not at
blow the
all.
game against Arizona. Baseball needed a good day of playoffs. I mean, the playoffs have been lackluster to say the least, so it's good to get a couple good games. But the Twitter handle is at Brian Gadsford, as I always say. Pretty self-explanatory, easy to remember, not a lot of extra characters and bells and whistles. So if you're so inclined to hit the follow button, we'd be appreciated, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, that was great. Of course, in the description, all of those links are down below, along with timestamps. Hey, if you could like this video, subscribe to the channel. Share this with your friends if you'd be so kind. We greatly appreciate that here. It's another fun week. We'll be back next week here on First and 10 to talk about Week 7 and make some Week 8 picks. And until then, thank you for watching.